Excellent. So, good morning. Hello, everybody here. Welcome to our webinar today on bringing your organization with you. Today, we are going to have some, hopefully, very good discussions about how you bring your organization with you when it comes to doing digital inclusion work. So for anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Jason. I'm one of the Digital Inclusion Development Officers here at SCVO, and I'm joined by my lovely colleague, Catherine. Catherine, if you want to say hello.
Hello. Jason has indeed brought his organisation with him, or at least me.
Literally. Thank you, Catherine. So for anyone that doesn't know SCVO, we are the membership body for the voluntary sector in Scotland, so supporting charities, social enterprises and organisations doing good things. SCVO Digital sits within SCVO, so the team that Catherine and I work for are all about working with our sector and beyond to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to engage with digital in a way that they choose. So the format for today is pretty much, I'm going to talk through some of the issues around bringing your organisation with you when it comes to digital inclusion. At the end, we will have probably around 10, 15, if we're lucky, minutes for a quick Q&A. The webinar today will be recorded, but we'll stop recording when it comes to the Q&A, just so we've got that space to have a kind of open and honest discussion. However, as we go through, if you do have any questions or thoughts or observations, please feel free to stick them in the chat. Catherine will be keeping an eye on that. And we will pick that up at the end. But first things first, desperate to know who's in the room. So just using the Zoom chat below, let us know your name, your organisation, and what you're here for today. We'd love to get a sense of who's in the room and why. And just as you're doing that, I'll give a kind of a brief overview, really, of what we're hoping to achieve today. So there's three main things. First things first. How do we encourage that buy-in for digital inclusion in our organisation? So how do we get people to think about digital inclusion as a good thing in our organisations? We'll be focusing mostly on staff and volunteers, but there will be a little bit of chat around leadership as well. The second thing is, how do we promote positive cultures among staff and volunteers? So how do we get them to think about digital inclusion as a good thing and a force for good and something that they should be involved in? And then lastly, how do we build that case for digital inclusion in a way that appeals to our teams and managers? So how do we talk to them about it? How do we start to break down some of those myths and kind of misunderstandings around what digital inclusion is and why it's important? So hopefully by the end of today, that's what we'll have covered. So let's kick off. First things first is just kind of having a think about some of the terminology that we use. So I wanted to kick off with a phrase that some of you might be aware of and some of you might not, but it's around what is a digital motivator. Digital motivators are people in organizations that are passionate about digital inclusion and want everybody to benefit from the digital world. So these are the people in your organization that take that lead role in making organizations become more digitally confident and supporting colleagues and volunteers to become digital champions. So in organizations, your digital motivators are the people that are beating the drum for digital inclusion. So they're often the people that are bringing organizations with them. So everybody in this room today, chances are you are a digital motivator yourself. So kind of having a think about what digital motivators look like in organizations. They are usually managers or team leaders, but that's not necessarily crucial. The really, really important part of being a digital motivator is kind of the three things under that. So it's somebody that understands why digital inclusion matters. So somebody that's quite passionate about it and really understands what a difference it could make to an organization and the people within it. But it's also really important that it's somebody that can lead and inspire other people within an organization. So somebody that's got the capacity to bring people with them and make change happen. And again, someone that can shape and influence activities within an organization. So someone who's in that position to make things happen. But being in a management position is not crucial. It is really those attributes that we've discussed that makes a digital motivator successful. They're really important for the digital inclusion journey in organizations because they do the important things like organizing and developing, and most importantly, promoting digital inclusion across organizations. We know that change often has to come from within organizations themselves. So these people, these digital motivators, are really best placed to encourage and motivate that change to happen. But there's one thing we always say at SCVO Digitals, there's one thing that digital motivators do, one key thing, and that is motivate downwards and agitate upwards. So by that, we mean that digital motivators support their colleagues to get excited and involved in combating digital exclusion, whether that's with staff or service users, but at the same time, really, really importantly, agitating upwards. So agitating your senior leaders and your management to invest and support and care about digital inclusion as a priority within the organization. So that's a really key phrase that we use at SCVO Digital, which actually I think came off the back of one of our housing programs that we did with housing associations a few years ago. So that's really stuck with us, but that really sums up the idea of what a digital motivator does. So now that we've had to think about who is it in your organization, who are those people that that are leading this kind of work? The second thing to think about is who do you need that buy-in from? So depending on your position or the size of your organization and the scale of your work, this question is going to be slightly different. So there are really three key sets of people that you need to get buy-in from when it comes to doing digital inclusion work within organizations and communities. The first one is your service users. So obviously the people that are accessing your service, whether they are customers or beneficiaries, however you refer to them, they are essential components of your service, obviously, and they might be the focus of your upskilling efforts. They might be the people that you're trying to support with digital inclusion. The second one is colleagues and volunteers, so your staff and volunteers in organizations. So are these other people in your organization? Are they frontline workers? Are they middle management? Chances are those are the kind of people that will be delivering the support. If you're running a digital inclusion program to support end users, it's your staff and volunteers that are likely to be delivering it. But it's also staff upskilling other staff if it's workforce skills that you're focusing on. And lastly, the leadership. So your board or your C-suite, your senior leadership team, whatever you call them, these are the people that make decisions. So those are the really important people to secure that buy-in from, because they are the people that are making the decisions about people and money. But our key focus today is really going to be on how we develop that buy-in from staff and volunteers in organizations. Because they're so crucial as the people that are delivering that digital inclusion support to the service users, or even receiving it if it's a workforce development program that we're looking at. But I do think it's important to kind of firstly consider getting that buy-in from leadership, and just to kind of take a really quick minute to think about what is it that you need to secure that buy-in from leadership. So having a conversation with the leadership in an organization about investing in digital upskilling and digital inclusion doesn't have to be hard, but it's important to remember that there are so many different competing priorities within an organization that can make it quite difficult. So over the last 10 or so years, we've been working with organizations of vastly different sizes to look at how we support and encourage senior leaders to do digital. And kind of off the back of that, we have kind of 4 top tips in terms of how you secure that buy-in from leadership. The first one is around using a data-driven approach. So data is absolutely your friend here. You can use tools like SCVO's Essential Digital Skills Checkup to kind of baseline and understand where your staff and your service users are at. With that data, you can then really make that clear case for the provision of digital upskilling. You can also use it to then identify where there are gaps in provision and skill, and use that to really contextualize why it's important to support everybody. It's important to remember that skills gaps really mean two things: that within an organization, there are inefficiencies and inequalities, and that is the kind of thing that speaks to senior leaders. The second one is around understanding the barriers. So this is where your institutional knowledge comes in really, really handy. So understanding what some of those key barriers might be that are preventing leadership from buying in. Are they concerned maybe about the time cost benefit of the work? Do they have a lack of understanding about what digital inclusion means and why it's important? Are they making maybe incorrect assumptions about the skills that exist in an organization? So, for example, senior leaders might think that because their staff are working from home or that they're shopping online, that they have all of the skills that they need for work. But we know that's not the case. You really need to be armed with your facts and data and just really make sure that you can effectively kind of bust those myths. And that's the start of how you can really develop that buy-in from senior leaders. The third point there is about developing your business case early. So spend the time to really understand the key issues. Immersing yourself in that knowledge and the understanding around digital exclusion and using resources that are available to you is a really helpful thing to do. So we have the Digital Participation Charter resource library, and it has all of the most up-to-date learning and research around digital inclusion, not just within Scotland, but beyond as well. If you think about linking your work to national and regional strategies and policies, like the Digital Health and Care Strategy or Scotland's digital strategy, it really starts to contextualise why it's important within different sectors. So digital exclusion is relevant to all of us. And like when we're working with our learners in terms of upskilling, it's really about finding the hooks for leadership. So what's going to get them interested in developing this as a piece of work? And lastly there, demonstrate the difference. So this is a really crucial one. It's really important, and we do it really, really well as a sector, but meet and speak with others that have done this before. So what did they do? How did they change or improve service delivery and support? What case studies can you use from them to really, really illustrate your point about why digital inclusion matters? I think stories are always really useful in terms of making our point for us. But if you're interested in learning more about securing that buy-in from leadership within an organization, next Thursday, the 31st of August, we will have a webinar called Speaking to Leaders About Digital Inclusion, where we'll be having a conversation with one of the senior leaders here at SCVO for his kind of detailed input on how you have that conversation and how you can effectively secure that buy-in. So more details on that to follow. But getting back to why we're here, how do you secure that buy-in from staff and volunteers? So how do you bring your organization with you? Delivering digital inclusion support will, like we say, require the support and input of your staff and volunteers. So as a digital motivator, it's your job to literally motivate them to want to make a difference. So this could apply to introducing digital upskilling in the workplace, or if it's that support for your service users like we talked about. What I thought would be really useful for us to do is look at some of the common barriers and arguments that staff and colleagues might have in terms of why they don't want to get involved in digital inclusion work, and have a think about how you can effectively formulate kind of counter arguments and address that and really help bring them on the journey. This is hopefully a useful thing, and you might recognize some of the arguments you've heard in your own organization or from your own colleagues. But yeah, let's jump into that. So the first one that we hear a lot from people who are hesitant about developing or delivering kind of digital inclusion support is that digital skills aren't relevant to me. So we would hope that after the pandemic, more people than ever before are convinced of the crucial role that digital plays in our lives. But we know this isn't the case. We know that not everybody is at the same point of passion or interest as we are. It's important to kind of counter the argument that digital skills aren't relevant to everybody because we all use essential digital skills across our everyday lives. Even if we think that the skills we're using aren't actually that important, or we're just so used to it that we assume everyone has them, it's important to reinforce that message that they still need to be developed. So you can look at it this way, in terms of someone says to you, digital skills aren't relevant to me, have a think about what you do in the everyday. So logging into your system in the morning is an essential digital skill. Filling in online forms is an essential digital skill. Accessing your payslip, essential digital skill. You know, things like using Facebook or browsing Instagram or using FaceTime and Zoom. The point is, if you can do it, you can teach it. Digital skills are absolutely relevant to everybody. Another side of this argument is keeping your essential digital skills up to date helps everybody. So it's really important to remember that digital skills aren't static. Technology changes so fast. So if we keep our own skills relevant and up to date, that's a really crucial thing to do so that we can support people who are slightly behind. So putting this in context, platforms and technologies and how we engage with service users or other staff change all the time. Thinking about the pandemic again, because it's a great example of how change happens. How many of our services relied on Zoom before the pandemic? But because we knew how to work other video conferencing software like Skype, remember Skype? We adapted quite quickly and quite easily, and it was easier than it would have been otherwise. The whole point is that staying up to date means that we can help more than just ourselves. It means that we can help the service users and colleagues that we work with. Another common argument we hear is that digital is not a substitute for in-person engagement. And this comes from organizations that work kind of directly with people who are probably quite vulnerable. The point is, we absolutely agree. Nothing can replace human interaction, and sometimes that's the best solution for some people. But you have to think about individual circumstances and why that's important to consider. So, for example, you know, imagine you have a disability or a mobility issue, or say you're living in poverty and you stay, you know, quite a fair distance from the service that you need to access. Or again, maybe you're a single parent and you're caring for 2 kids and you need to juggle this appointment with an organization or a service with 3 other that you got that day. For some people, those who have access and can use it, digital is the most convenient form of support. So it's not that we're trying to replace in-person support and how useful and helpful that is. It's just that for some people, this is a much better way to access services. But it also means that things are more efficient as well. So digital means that we can work more efficiently. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to increase our workload, but it means that we spend less time on tasks that would otherwise take us longer. So think about things like traveling to meetings or appointments and managing diaries. That's so much easier with digital. All of this means that we can help more people. So it's really about that value proposition. Not only does it make your job slightly easier, but it means that you're able to support more people and really deliver high quality engagement for people that need it. It's about digital as an enabler. That's the point. When people say to you, it's not a substitute for in-person engagement, absolutely. No, it's not, but it does make life easier. This is my favorite one. Digital is for IT to worry about, not me. It's that kind of complete neglect of responsibility there. What we always say at SCVO Digital is that digital inclusion is everybody's responsibility and we all have a role to play. So the IT department in your organization are absolutely the people that you call when you, I don't know, accidentally spill coffee over your laptop and it starts to, you know, gently smoke. But when it comes to digital inclusion, all of us have a role to play. Every person in the organization has a role to play. Sharing digital skills, it's not about being a tech genius. It's about having people skills. So being able to be patient and sharing knowledge and having a genuine passion to see people succeed. Those are the skills that you need to share digital. We always say that digital inclusion is social inclusion. It's that enabler that unlocks so many doors, especially for the most vulnerable in society who are at the most risk of being left behind. So don't leave digital to one department just because they work with computers. Everybody has a role to play within that, and it's a really strong argument to make. But again, it's really about thinking, if we're going to bring people with us, let's have a conversation about how we do that. So let's involve everybody in how we develop and design support. So the best way to get that buy-in is to make sure you build in that space and time for the people you want to work with to have a say. So involving your staff and volunteers in shaping the program that you want to develop is so important. So remember, whether it's themselves or your service users that you want to upskill, they are the people that know them best. So they work with them every day and understand what works for them. So give your staff and volunteers a voice and an opportunity to shape what that support looks like. Help to immerse them in the issues around digital exclusion as well. Bring them into the fold and really contextualize what digital exclusion looks like. I think the best way to bring people on a journey is to give them ownership over what a service or a program looks like. Get them invested, make them care about it. I think that's a really, really crucial way to bring people with you. The last of the common arguments that I want to talk about is one that we sometimes hear around service users being too vulnerable for digital. So we know that going online can be risky for people, especially if you've got those extra vulnerabilities. But we have to recognize that risk is a part of life. Digital is about choice. It's about finding ways to make things easier, cheaper, and more inclusive. I think the argument here is that it's not fair to not at least offer it to people that could benefit from it most. It's a disservice to prevent them or not necessarily support them to access that. And on that point about service users being too vulnerable for digital, well, we can all learn how to protect ourselves online. Everybody has the capacity and capability to protect themselves online. There are so many resources and areas of support to make sure that people stay safe online. So people with those extra vulnerabilities can really prioritize that within their learning. But we can make it easy for them, and we can contextualize online safety in a way that is more understandable and digestible. So one thing we always talk about at SCVO is online safety it's like having a house, right? So leaving your window open is the same as having a weak password. If you make it easy to understand and make it easy to digest, everybody benefits. There's no argument really in people being too vulnerable for digital if you can give them the tools to protect themselves. So those are our really kind of common arguments about why staff are sometimes hesitant or resistant to engage in kind of digital inclusion activity or digital change, but hopefully you feel a little bit more armed in being able to counter those. I really want to talk about embedding digital inclusion support. So we know that the best way to approach digital inclusion within organizations is to embed it and make sure it's every day. So the best way to bring everybody with you is just to really normalize digital inclusion. And there are a couple of different ways that we can do that. So just to kind of quickly go over what embedded digital support looks like. First things first, we have what we call digital nudges. So those are the opportunities that you create to demonstrate how digital can make a positive impact. So for example, maybe it's a conversation about buying train tickets. So is your service user sick of waiting in the queue at the station for a ticket? This is your opportunity to show them that there's an app for that it can save them time and probably money. Or maybe, you've got a colleague that loves radio but wishes he could, revisit shows that he missed earlier in that week. There's an app for that as well. Not to sound like an Apple advert, but BBC Sounds is right there. It's really it's about creating those opportunities to demonstrate how digital can make life easier for people. Those little nudges in the everyday embedded into your service that make people think differently about digital. The other thing is our favorite phrase, find the hook. So what is it that would motivate somebody to get online? So I know colleagues at More Collective will know this, but sometimes the first conversations that we have about digital aren't anything to do with devices. When we get to know somebody, we get to know what they enjoy and like, and then we can find a hook to tempt them online. So your colleague loves gardening. Are there podcasts about gardening that you get them interested in, or different websites? It's really about finding that motivation and that hook to get them online. The third point there is around developing, supporting digital champions. So the best way to embed digital skill support within an organization is to make sure that you have members of staff and volunteers that are on hand and ready to help. So those are our digital champions. Those are the heroes of digital inclusion within organizations. Just last week, we did a webinar on developing and embedding digital champions, which is on YouTube, and I'll share the link afterwards if that's of interest. The fourth point there is around feedback, so creating space and time for feedback. I don't have to say this to the voluntary sector, but listening to the staff and the people that you work with should never get old. So think about, how are you going to create those opportunities for them to feedback on how things are going in terms of this digital journey, in terms of the journey that you're taking them on and bringing them with you? Because that has to be part of your commitment to a culture change within an organization, putting people really at the heart of decisions that impact them, and changing culture within an organization is really important. And lastly there, iterate, tweak, but keep going. So it's not going to be perfect first time, and that's why we rely on that feedback that we just talked about. Keep iterating how you provide that support in an organization, tweak it where there are pain points, but the most important thing you can do is keep going. We talk about trying the lighthouse effect. So start with one part of the service, see how it works, and then roll it out from there. Aim for 20%, and fingers crossed that eventually you get 100%. Remember, when digital is embedded and part of the everyday, that's when it becomes so much easier to bring the staff and volunteers in your organization with you. Culture change doesn't happen overnight, you know that. So it's so important to start small and work up. Creating it as part of the everyday is how we make it normal. So that's embedding. I'm conscious that we're kind of coming towards the end of this kind of bite-sized webinar. I've given you a lot of information, so I thought it would be useful just to recap some of the key messages from the last half an hour. First things first, this is so crucial. Digital inclusion is a journey that everybody has a role in. It's not always easy to establish digital inclusion work within an organization. But remember that everybody benefits from being able to engage digitally. So if everybody has a role within that, everybody should be bought in. And people can only buy in if they have a stake. So building people's knowledge about what digital exclusion means and looks like will make it relevant to them and their role. So how does it impact their life? How does it impact the people that they work with? Contextualize it and demonstrate why they have a role in it. Why is it important to them? The second thing is that data is key. So the data that you use should be three things. It should be recent, relevant, and real. Understanding the skills of your staff or service users is absolutely essential to building the case for digital inclusion. And that's something that we at SCVO can help you with as an organization. Learn from others, understand where they've been, and keep your knowledge up to date. Building that business case that will most appeal to the people you work with is absolutely crucial in making sure you bring that organization with you. Bring the voices in. So this is back to that co-production and involving people. So the people on the front line of your organization are the people that work with your service users every day. They know them and they know how to communicate with and support them. So they are an absolutely invaluable resource to have when developing support. Why wouldn't you want them in the conversation around developing digital inclusion support? And it's the same with your staff. Doing your user research and co-designing your support with your staff will help them come on that journey with you. Involve them from the start. It's not a case of suddenly on a Wednesday morning saying, right, we're doing digital inclusion now. Bring them with you from the get-go and bring their voices and experience into that planning. Embed the work. so that it becomes part of the everyday. So introducing digital inclusion to your organization is just like any other kind of change. It's about fostering that culture that is open to doing things slightly differently. So a really key way to do this is just embedding that support so that it feels normal. So going back to what we mentioned earlier about making it normal, making it part of the everyday, those digital nudges and those hooks that make people feel more comfortable with digital. How can we embed digital skills support in everything we do? Think about the different services that you offer. Where does digital sit within those? And lastly, this is my favorite thing to say because it's so nice, but celebrate. So absolutely celebrate the distance that you travel, regardless of how big or small it is. Each step is absolutely worthy of recognition, and you should celebrate the staff and volunteers that make it happen. Equally, though, use their feedback to know what needs to change and how you do it. So how are you going to adapt when things don't necessarily go to plan, or how will you make sure that digital becomes part of the fabric of your service or organization? It's so important to just take that time to reflect and listen. People at the center of services need to remain the focus. Digital is just a tool. However long it takes to get there, however long it takes to get to supporting the people that you need to support is fine. Just keep going. And that's the key messages from us today. There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of things to consider. But the first thing is, what are you going to do next? So here are some things you can do. I know your brains will probably be abuzz with the sound of my voice and all the information I've just given you. But here's some options that you could consider. First things first, have a chat with us about developing those digital champion programs and the kind of support that we can offer. So we offer a lot of programs in terms of how digital inclusion can fit within your service. Second things is think about that data that you need to collect. Remember, data is key, and we need to use that data-driven approach when we're trying to get buy-in from people. So you can use our essential digital skills checkup, and we offer support on that as well. So happy to have a conversation about that. But also have a think about how you can start to put those wheels in motion. So how are you going to bring people with you? Just take 10, 15 minutes after this webinar to have a think. What is the best place to start for your organization? Is it having conversations with senior leaders, or is it having conversations with your service users? What is that first step? But any next steps or any questions, any thoughts you have, please just stick them in the chat. We've got probably about 10 minutes left to have a conversation about that. But just before we do, you might or might not be aware that this is part of a series of digital inclusion masterclasses. We've been running them for the past month or so. There are 2 left. So next week, like I said, we've got that chatting with senior leaders about digital inclusion. It's going to be a really interesting, engaging session about how you get that support and buy-in from management. And the last one in the series is around doing digital inclusion with limited resources. So how do we develop and deliver digital inclusion support at a time when finances are really restricted and tight? And how can we think about how we can be creative and collaborative in doing that? So you can book online any of these events at scvo.scot/events, but we will send the links out afterwards. And that is more than enough of my chat. Any questions in the chat, or please feel free just to take yourself off mute and ask. But meanwhile, would be much obliged if you could scan the QR code and fill out the short evaluation, just to let us know how you found this session. It's the first one that we've run of this, so really interested to hear how it went, how we could improve, and what you liked. But that is it for me. I'll stop recording and we can have a chat.